No man is above the law, and no man is below it. Nor do we ask any man's permission when we require him to obey it. Theodore Roosevelt, America's 26th president, once uttered these famous words, and they really do speak to his profound sense of wisdom. These words, they might sound simple, but they express a very important message. Nobody, regardless of their position or place in this world, gets to break the law with impunity. And similarly, no one is so powerless or low that they can't seek justice when they've been wronged. And that's really one of the most beautiful things about the United States of America. Everybody is held accountable to the exact same standard, at least in theory. Whether it's a student, a teacher, a professional athlete, or even a politician, everybody is equal in the eyes of the law. And that concept brings us to today's top story, the ongoing legal saga surrounding Jerome Powell, chairman of the Federal Reserve. So Powell was recently referred to the Department of Justice by Florida Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna for potential perjury charges, and it pertains to his testimony before the Senate Banking Committee on June 25th, where he allegedly misled Congress by making two false statements about the details of a renovation project for the Federal Reserve's headquarters. The central bank is currently undergoing a massive renovation project worth $2.5 billion. However, the cost was originally projected to be $1.9 billion, meaning it's hundreds of millions of dollars over budget right now. And the big question is, why? Why exactly are we over budget? Is it, say, just the cost of repairing aging infrastructure? Or maybe is it something else? Now, Powell allegedly said the cost increase was to avoid any further delays to the project and to simplify construction. However, Congresswoman Luna said these claims are materially false. To that point, she has claimed that Powell misled lawmakers by denying the inclusion of lavish and completely unnecessary features that are driving up the project's cost during his testimony, including premium marble finishes, a VIP dining room, and even a rooftop terrace garden. Now, in response, she referred Powell to Attorney General Pam Bondi, accusing him of perjury, and arguing that official documents prove that these features are part of the renovation plans. And that's very interesting. But such a stunning development really leaves one with a whole lot of important questions. For example, why exactly is the government funding a multi-billion-dollar project when the country is more than $37 trillion in debt? Is it really that important for us to go even deeper into debt so that unelected bureaucrats can work in style? And why exactly should the Fed get another dime when millions of Americans across the country, from coast to coast, are financially struggling? And what exactly does Powell have to say for himself about these allegations? Well, of course, he's reportedly denied them, and he's reportedly called for an internal review of the renovation. However, that's not exactly going to cut it, at least not for Congresswoman Luna, and neither for the American people who, frankly, deserve answers. Now, perjury is also a very serious offense, and it could come with a prison sentence of up to 5 years, which means it's about time we get to the truth about what's really going on. It's also up to the DOJ to decide exactly how to proceed from here. As of now, it's unclear if they have a case against him, and it's also unclear if they would charge him with perjury should they have legal standing to do so moving forward. But either way, Congresswoman Luna's referral comes amidst rising tensions between Powell and President Trump. Now, Trump has repeatedly expressed his frustration with Powell's job performance in recent weeks, and Trump has even lambasted him for refusing to lower interest rates as well. Trump has even entertained the idea of possibly firing him from his position. But that's the really interesting kicker to the story here. Drawing the president's ire for refusing to lower interest rates, that's one thing. But lying to lawmakers under oath is a whole nother thing. And ironically, his own testimony before the Senate Banking Committee could ultimately be the factor that leads to his termination. Now, of course, it's important to note that everybody in America is innocent until proven guilty, and only time will tell if Powell actually perjured himself on the record. But Luna has made a very compelling argument that he did, and now the DOJ will take it from here. And here with his reaction is Eric Eggers, the Vice President of the Government Accountability Institute. Eric, thank you for being here.
Hey, it's always a pleasure, Riley. Happy Tuesday.
Absolutely, the same to you. Look, perjury, that's a very serious allegation to make, but I think Congresswoman Luna has made an extremely compelling argument for it, and I want to get your thoughts about that.
Yeah, it's weird, right? On the one hand, it seems like it could be considered a technicality. I mean, do they have marble finishes? I was today years old when I learned that Italian beehives were apparently a decorative option that the Federal Reserve's new building has chosen. And so, is this really about, I like how we're like, well, it's $2.5 billion. That's way over budget. As if a $1.9 billion renovation to the Federal Reserve building would have been just totally fine, as you noted, given the financial state of our current country right now. But I think this is about a much larger thing. This is about the relative lack of happiness with the performance of Jerome Powell. They want him to lower interest rates. He has declined to do so repeatedly, despite mounting pressure on behalf of President Trump and his allies. My understanding is if they wanted to fire him, they have to fire him for a cause, whatever that may be deemed. And so what Representative Luna, I think, is trying to do helpfully for President Trump is offer up an option that he might select if he chooses to ultimately let Jerome Powell go. So is it about perjury? Maybe. We've seen people go to prison for refusing to testify before Congress. But I think ultimately it's about the interest rates and his lack of obedience to President Trump's desires.
Okay, so let's talk about interest rates then for a moment, because I think you're right about that, Eric. So what is your position on them right now, and do you think they should be lowered?
It's tricky, right? I mean, at the end of the day, why we're in this position is because the Federal Reserve, you got to remember this, Riley, and I know you've been following this for a long time, but they pumped 300 years worth of wealth into our economy in 3 months during COVID. So all the problems we're having, the inflation and then all the different economic policy choices we've made since then have been as a result of that. There's this phrase, today's problems are yesterday's solution. Well, that solution has caused the current climate. They were attempting to have this conversation about what should we do. And so, yeah, on the one hand, do I think interest rates should come down? Sure. But if we already think things are kind of expensive now, lowering interest rates is just going to make money more available. And so, it's complicated. That's why we leave this to experts. And so, I think Jerome Powell presiding over not just an extremely expensive economy, but an extremely expensive renovation to the building in which he resides is unfortunately very on brand.
It is, and I had to bring that up because you wonder, so we're more than $37 trillion in debt, right? Spending about $1 trillion every 100 days. And for the average Joe out there, you're just wondering, where exactly is all the money going? Is it overhead? Is it fixing infrastructure? Is it salaries for people in Congress or these unelected bureaucrats? I mean, it's a sincere question, and as the cost of living just goes up and up and up across the board, people are really wondering, how exactly did we get into this debt problem? And more importantly, what are we going to do about it? So I want to turn that question over to you, Eric.
I will say, I think the best argument for lowering interest rates, despite whatever other ancillary costs may come with it, is the fact that for many people in the middle class, the current state of play is too expensive. It's way too expensive to buy a new home. It's way too expensive to purchase a new vehicle. It costs too much money for regular people to get money. And so, part of the problem is that when they pumped all that money into the economy, the major beneficiaries of it were the financial institutions, the people that were kept afloat. The ruling class looks after itself, and unfortunately, the middle class has been hollowed out. That's one of the reasons why Donald Trump was reelected. It's one of the reasons behind all the decisions they make for Trump's overall economic policies, including the tariffs. And so, I think that's ultimately the pressure that Donald Trump is responding to. He hears the cries of the middle class, and he's attempting to get Jerome Powell to hear them as well.
And I appreciate that, I do. I also, though, don't envy the position Powell was in, considering we have a much deeper problem here when it comes to government spending. But the Fed's also implicated in that, printing money endlessly and then loaning it to the government at very low interest rates. So it's all connected, and that brings me to another question for you then, Eric. So the Fed, they're supposed to be managing inflation right and pursuing what is a more stable interest rate or inflation rate for the American people. What do you think that rate exactly would be, and how do you assess Powell's current job performance to date?
I'll answer the second question first. I would assess it as, not terrific. I think the fact that things are as expensive as they are, I do think he's been largely somewhat responsive. I mean, just think back a year ago to where we were and the fact that Joe Biden was in as much trouble as he was in, ultimately so much that he was forced off of the ticket, is because of the economy. And so while Jerome Powell has been a Trump appointee, it's the Joe Biden economic policies combined with the performance of the Federal Reserve that created an economy where it was just way too expensive. The cost of eggs, the cost of cereal, everything is incredibly high. It remains, by the way, very high if you go to a supermarket today. But I do think there's a lot of indications that prices are coming down and the inflation is slowed, if not gone away. So I think things are becoming more accessible and they're becoming more affordable. But Donald Trump knows, hey, look, we just passed our major tax reforms. Now's the time people want to see economic relief. And so the best way to deliver economic relief immediately to the American people is to see interest rates lower. I think that's ultimately why he's driving this point. And that's ultimately why the idea that, hey, we have additional leverage. If you'd like to keep your job, as we think you might, then maybe here's another reason that you should consider our request to lower interest rates.
Okay, interesting. So on that note, can we talk about tariffs for just a moment? We have this deadline coming up August 1st, and Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has said it's a hard deadline, so for any countries who want to avoid those or minimize them, you have to make a deal right now. I first want to start with your broad interpretation of this approach and whether or not you think the tariff policies that have been implemented are wise or not for the U.S. economy.
Well, let me say this. I think Scott Bessent's like the cool professor. He says it's a hard deadline, but I bet if you ask nicely, you can get an extension. Okay. And because we've seen Donald Trump offer that for a number of countries on a number of different issues throughout his presidency. I think actually, Mark Halperin said that he thinks Donald Trump's decision-making process is absolute but ongoing. So he never fully decides a thing, and he's always willing to reconsider it. We've seen that with the TikTok ban. We've seen that with tariffs with China. We've seen that with a lot of different issues. So I know there's a package of economic tariffs that are set to expire. They're on hold right now, and they're set to expire August 6th in Europe. And now I think, you see a lot of posturing. I think you'll see negotiations just ongoing. But, I think at the end of the day, they will get a deal done. There's too much cost to too many entities to leave it unresolved.
Okay. Now, I think one thing here that's really, I think the root of it, honestly, I could be wrong, Eric, but I want to get your thoughts. So dealing with the side effects of globalization, outsourcing, losing industries, offshoring of jobs, that's been a giant problem for a large swath of this country. And I don't know if you can undo that necessarily, but I think the approach and whether or not it's wise depends upon your end goal. If you're just trying to boost the profits for multinationals, then maybe it's not the best choice. However, if you're trying to bring jobs back to American soil, then I think tariffs clearly are the right way to go. It's a form of protectionism. So I want to get your thoughts about this underlying issue of globalization, how it's impacted the average American worker, and what you think the right approach is to some of these less than desirable side effects of this globalized economy.
Yeah, it's a great question, Riley, and I'll just point out a story that's in the news today. Stellantis, the international car manufacturer, yes, who makes Jeeps, is saying that they're going to lose $2.7 billion, I think, partly due to, or according to them, almost exclusively due to the tariffs. And so, but just consider a couple things. Number one, their sales were down 15% in the United States last year. They were down 18% in Canada. They're down 48% in Europe in 2022. So this has not been a brand that's been ascending up the economic ladder. And so the tariffs are in many ways a convenient excuse for them as to why they're going to continue to underperform. Their CEO stepped down last May. But Riley, like the company that makes Jeeps is having to pay a lot of tariffs because they don't make Jeeps in the United States. Like, Jeep is the quintessential American car brand, or it's one of them anyway. And so if its parent company is saying they have to pay a lot of tariffs because they don't make enough cars in this country, then that speaks to the globalization and the offshoring of the jobs. And that means that's a lot of families here who don't work for those companies. That's one of the critiques, by the way, going back to Jerome Powell, when they dumped all that money into the economy, not just during COVID, but when they started the quantitative easing program over a decade ago. That money didn't create a bunch of jobs necessarily. It just helped boost the bottom lines of these global financial institutions. That's ultimately what Donald Trump's attempting to address, and the tariffs are a tool by which he's choosing to address it.
Okay, interesting. Then final question for you, just looking at the next few days and weeks, because I agree the August 1st deadline, maybe it's firm or maybe they're just saying that as a negotiation tactic to bring people to the table. But just on that note, what do you expect to happen in the coming weeks?
Yeah, I think that enough, what always happens, Riley? Enough is going to happen. They're going to move close enough to each other where they can both declare a victory, they'll declare a deal, and they will find a way to ultimately help create jobs here in the United States. And I think it's been, by the way, very effective. You've seen every week a different companies announcing they're going to spend billions of dollars worth of investment to create jobs, build new factories here in the United States. And Europe's going to need to say, look, we have access to these markets. Our products are not going to be taxed this way. And they'll find a way to classify it as key and strategic, as they've done for, look, NVIDIA gets to sell their chips to China again,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So clearly, nothing's totally off the table. They'll find a way to figure it out. Because ultimately it's going to be what's best interest for the American consumer, but the American business. Donald Trump's been consistent on that. And for American businesses to have access to foreign markets is good for their bottom line as well.
I completely agree. I get it. This is a big approach. It's something of a gamble, too. It's because it's bigger than just policy. It's kind of a reordering of the modern global economy. But the big question is, and the only one that I'm really interested in, is this good for the American people? Is this going to help the average Joe on the street? I hope it will, and I think it will. You've laid out a very good case for that, Eric, and so for that, I thank you, and I thank you for your time as well.